y'all, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. So you probably clicked on this video because you saw that it was a free pattern review video, but the way that we're going about this video is a little bit different just because I normally, when I choose patterns that are all on the same platform. So for example, if I'm looking for free patterns, I might go to Instagram exclusively and pick Instagram patterns. Other times I've done YouTube tutorials. Another time I've done Pinterest tutorials. But in today's video, we're gonna do like a mix mash of different platforms handing out free patterns, which shouldn't be a huge issue for y'all. I just wanted to mention that before we get started today. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the topic of today's video, the theme, if you will, of today's video is K-pop Demon Hunters, which if you're not familiar, it's a Netflix movie that came out recently this summer that was really popular. And I kept seeing patterns from the movie pop up all over Instagram on my Explore page. And I was just thinking to myself, what are these characters from? And it turns out they're all from K-pop Demon Hunters. So I had the idea of just making a free pattern review video completely dedicated to just patterns from that movie because it's so popular right now, and kind of test different patterns and see which ones are better, which ones are worth your time, and just see what's out there because it is really popular right now, and I know that a lot of people are searching for patterns like this. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look at some of the patterns on my computer and get some first impressions about what these patterns might be like. So starting out, here is my saved page with all the patterns that I've found on Instagram for free, as well as some of these are just actually YouTube videos. So for example, we'll start with the first Instagram pattern I found is this pattern here for the Magpie. And at first glance, it doesn't look like it's a English written pattern, but when you slide all the way to the back here, we start to see some English instructions written in here. Obviously, we're going to have the caveat that some of the instructions and errors that I might notice in the pattern in my review itself are probably subject to a little bit of leeway because it's translated from a different language, and I'll be taking it a little bit easier on patterns like that. There are actually multiple patterns in this video that will be in a different language translated to English. The next pattern I found is this one right here, the tiger pattern, and it's really cool, really awesome. I'm noticing a lot of felt pieces initially, but it looks like it should be lower sew based on these legs here. Hopefully lower sew, and then it looks like the body and head are probably made together in one piece as well, so I'm very hopeful that this one will be a lower sew project. Our next Instagram pattern is another Magpie pattern. This one looks like it might be a little bit smaller than that first one that I showed you. It looks like we're also using safety eyes and embroidering around the safety eyes instead of having to create the entire eye by crocheting. It also looks like it's using light gray instead of white for one of the body colors, but we'll see what we do if we end up using light gray or if we end up using white. Next up, I found some patterns that are like accessories to the tiger pattern, and it's for a tiger pattern that isn't a free pattern. It's one that you can buy on this creator's Etsy, I think. So that is why I wanted to review this pattern. It looks like it's a flower pot, the one that the tiger knocks over and over again in the movies. It would be a really cute accessory to put together with that tiger, the finished tiger, hopefully around the right size, being that it's not the same pattern designer's pattern that we're doing the tiger and the flower pot. Our last Instagram pattern is also another accessory to that same tiger, same creator that made the flower pot. It's the hat. Now on to website patterns. There are two patterns I am reviewing for this video that are not on Instagram or YouTube. They're just on different websites. So this first one is available for free on Ko-fi, and it's a Rumi and Jinu keychain pattern. So hopefully a pretty small pattern, but it looks like once we're looking closer at these stitches that it might be a little bit bigger when working with Premiere or Big Twist, 5mm yarn, so I might be working in acrylic to do this project so that it actually comes out to keychain size. Our next website pattern is another tiger. It looks like it's a smaller version and like a four-legged version instead of like a sitting version of the tiger pattern, so that's really cool. It looks like it uses felt for the eye itself, and you can also print out one of these little invitations that the tiger spits out on its tongue in the movie as well. That would be really cool. But overall, it looks like a much smaller pattern than the first tiger that we saw. Next up, we have a YouTube pattern, and it is the HUNTRIX girls. They're like in chibi small format, so each of these look really cute and potentially really low so I'm really excited to try that one out as well. When I started listening and like to the audio of this pattern, however, it's not in English, but there are English subtitles, so I'll have to be reading the subtitles throughout this entire pattern to get the actual instructions. Next up, we have another Magpie pattern. So this is Birdie the crow, and it looks like it's using felt, but it's also using the yarn type that we will potentially be using to make this one, so that is really awesome. So yeah, that's another pattern. It kind of feels like this video is like really bird heavy, but that's just because of the patterns that are available out there are mostly for the bird itself. Next up, we have yet another Magpie pattern. This one is for the entire bird. It looks like it's worked in acrylic yarn, so another cool pattern for that one. And it looks like the pattern is done like shot vertically, so perhaps it was made for TikTok or Instagram initially, and then they chose to put it on YouTube instead, so that is nice. But it looks like it's a really detailed pattern, and it'll be pretty easy to follow, I hope. So anyway, we have a lot of patterns to crochet for this video, so let's go ahead and get started. As I've been crocheting for this video, I've really been enjoying my new favorite piece of furniture in my living room, the Flexi Spot Lotus Recliner. This recliner has a spacious seat and provides plenty of space for just about every sitting position. It gives me tons of space to cross my legs and crochet, reclining upright with one of my doggies by my side, or even sit sideways across the whole seat while I read my book. I love that this recliner also has a flexible swivel and rocking mechanism that offers ultimate comfort, helping me relieve stress like a warm embrace. This recliner is the electric version, which has buttons on its side to recline effortlessly, all while also charging up to 2 devices at a time. My recliner came in this beautiful light gray color that matches well with the furniture I already have in my living room, as well as the decor that I have. And that's not all. It also has a secret storage space on the side, which is perfect for storing a crochet hook, scissors, stitch markers, and even a couple skeins of yarn. There are so many different options to choose from for this recliner. You can get either a manual or electric, with or without a phone holder that also charges your phone. And there's also a ton of different color options, both fabric and PU leather. Y'all, I can't stress enough how much I love this new recliner, and it's been pretty funny because whenever I'm done working for the day and my husband is done working for the day, we've eaten dinner and we sit down to relax in the living room, I've been preferring this chair over the chair I usually sit on to snuggle up with my husband, so he's been a little bit jealous of this new recliner as well. So with that being said, you should honestly know how much I love this chair. If you want to check it out yourself, make sure you check out the link located in my description and use code LOTUS30 to get $30 off your purchase as well as free shipping. And with all that being said, thank you so much FlexiSpot for sponsoring today's video, and let's go ahead and look at the finished products. Hey y'all, so we are in my master bedroom, which we haven't filmed in here in at least a month, if not more. But the reason I'm in here today instead of in the office with my beautiful yarn shelves in the background is because my husband has a lot of meetings today, and they're like pretty important meetings that I can't disturb. So I decided I was just gonna go ahead and film down here instead of waiting to see like when he'll get out of his meeting so I can film in the office, but not a big deal at all. I'm really excited to show you guys all of these patterns, but before we get started, I always like to go over my rating criteria for the free pattern review. And I also wanted to mention that in the past handful of free pattern review videos, I have been creating 3 of each pattern in different yarn sizes, but because of the nature of today's video being like really specific to, you know, this movie that we're doing, and as well as just like trying to conserve time, because a lot of these projects were like larger projects that took a lot more time than I typically invest in making one of these videos. There is only going to be one of each of these patterns in one yarn size that I thought would be the most suited for the project. So unfortunately I don't have like the different size comparison this video. I know you guys really like that, but just know that I'm not defaulting back to doing that. In future free pattern review videos, I will go back to making 3 of each, just because I know you guys like that a lot, and it helps me to see like what I should price a product at, as well as if it's worth making a project in different yarn sizes. A lot of the time, if you size up and you're working with much larger yarn, it might take you a little bit longer because of just the effort that goes into making some of the stitches with larger yarn. Same thing with smaller yarn. I found that working on this video specifically, when I size down to like worsted weight yarn, I work a lot slower, and I think it's just because I am so used to working with like really silky chenille yarns that just glide right off my hook. So I think that is probably also something that limits the amount of time I can create something quickly, like the efficiency factor. But anyway, before we get started, we're going to talk about the rating criteria that I use to review these patterns. Before I tell you each of the rating criteria, there's only 3. I also like to preface these videos with saying that just because I may rate a pattern lower doesn't mean that it's not a good pattern to use. It just means that it didn't work for me. In addition to that, when I'm reviewing these patterns, I try to point out every little mistake that I run into, so that if you use the pattern, you won't find something that I might not have mentioned that might be a deal breaker for you. And also, I just think it's really important that patterns, when they're released in any way, shape, or form, whether they're free or you pay for them, I think they should just be really good patterns, really solid patterns. And I don't think there should be some of the major issues that I may discuss in today's video that would make it below a 3-star pattern. And with that being said, just because a pattern is lower than 5 stars doesn't mean it's not a good pattern, doesn't mean that there are redeemable qualities in that pattern. It just means that it's not needing any work. So number 1 of my rating criteria is, would I use the pattern again? This boils down to if the pattern is enjoyable for me to make, if there was any frustrations I ran into, or anything that would be a deal breaker for me in the future to consider making the pattern again. Number 2 is, can I understand the pattern easily? This is all about if the instructions are easy to follow for any level of crocheter, whether you're a beginner or if you're a veteran crocheter. If the pattern doesn't thoroughly explain more complicated steps with thorough instructions, work in progress photos, or diagrams, I'm more likely to rate the pattern lower, just because it can be confusing for different levels of crocheters, and it might also cause some problem solving to have to occur for you to fully finish the pattern to what it was intended to be. And then finally, number 3 is, do I like the finished product? This is about if we think the finished product that we made is visually pleasing and that other people would like it as well. And in addition to that, it's also about if it's an expectations versus reality case, where the pattern photos present this beautiful finished product and maybe what you get doesn't look anything like it. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and look at the finished products of the patterns that I showed you guys earlier. The first pattern I reviewed for this video is called Sussie Bird, and this is a double-sided bird where one side of the Magpie bird from the movie has a crescent shape eye or a half moon shape eye, and the other side has like the demon version of the eyes where they split into 3 separate eyes. And I think this project was really beautiful. There's lots of details in it, lots of little things that I noticed that the other Magpie patterns that I reviewed in this video left out. For example, these spots on the chest, I didn't see that in any other pattern. As well as the beak, it has a really unique shape where it decreases before it meets the face. So we've got this kind of curvy shape at the top of the beak. And I also noticed that the tail on this bird is the most realistic bird type tail of all of the ones that I made as well. So those are some of the main differences I noticed about this pattern versus other similar patterns in this video. Now getting into the notes that I had about this pattern, first up, I noticed some vague instructions, starting with the fact that there are no work in progress photos. When you start each part of the pattern, it also doesn't tell you what color you should be starting in, but I assume in most cases it was black because whenever there was a color change, it was noted in blue letters, and it would tell you higher up on that page that blue letters are in white yarn or whatever yarn color they were supposed to be in. But it's not immediately obvious that we're crocheting in black for any of these areas. The next thing I noticed was after round 15, the pattern just drops the stitch count at the end of each round, which ended up being a little bit of an issue for me in areas where I noticed errors in the pattern or areas where the pattern didn't really line up for the following rows. In the tail section, I noticed a lot of little issues with vague instructions, starting off with there's not a note that we're no longer working in the round and that we're switching to working in the row. I wasn't completely sure if that was the issue at first, but that was what I suspected. And then I realized later that we're chaining 4 and then we're supposed to maybe work around the chain like you would to make a oval shape. In the first row, we only chain 4 and there are 8 stitches in that row that we're supposed to work, but there's only 4 stitches to work into. There's no note about working around or working back and forth. Whatever we're supposed to be doing, it's not super obvious. In my interpretation, I think that the chain 1 acts like a turning chain, and then the stitches that are in brackets are all done in a single stitch, and it would be really helpful for a note to be there that tells you that, because that's the only way that it makes sense to make those stitches, and it took a lot of problem solving to figure that out. Finally, another note in the tail section was that round 12 was particularly confusing because it says after overlapping 4 single crochets. It honestly took me a really long time to figure out that that meant that you're supposed to pinch the work closed and then single crochet the fold closed. Continuing in the vague instructions, in the wings section, there were some issues starting in round 7. You start on the black part of the wing that tapers off, and it's not a circle anymore. It tells you to skip 8 stitches and then make 8 single crochets. But I think what really needs to happen is you need to fasten off the white, then attach the black yarn centered over the 2 double crochets in the last round, and then do that work. Then after round 7, it tells you to turn over the crochet fabric, and I think what is meant to say there is that we're going to turn and crochet back and forth in rows instead of rounds, but it's kind of confusing the way that it's written. The next note that I had is that there are some missing instructions starting in the dots section. I think each of the dots should be finished with a slip stitch into the first single crochet of the magic ring. Otherwise, they're not circles. They kind of just look like Pac-Man shapes. Another thing that I noticed in terms of missing instructions is there is no assembly page, and there's not assembly instructions for almost everything except for the tail. So you're supposed to just rely on the first main photo, the only photo of the pattern, to sew things on. There's also no instructions for making the feet, but it looks like they might be pipe cleaners, but I'm not completely sure. There's also a little yarn needle sticking up out of the bottom of the finished product, which shows you that it doesn't really sit up on its own, even with those feet on there. The last note I had about the pattern was that I saw some errors, and this could honestly be due to a language barrier because the original pattern is written in a different language. I don't know what language, but it's written in some sort of Asian language. The first error that I noticed was that there was a typo in round 20 where it says 15 increases, and I believe in that row it's supposed to be 15 single crochets. That's the only way that makes sense. Then in round 31, there was an issue with the amount of stitches it was asking me to make and the amount of stitches I could actually fit in that round. If I was to make all 25 single crochets, it tells you to make after the decrease times 4, I wouldn't have room for the final decrease of the round. So instead I made 21 single crochets and then 1 decrease at the end of the round. I don't know where the error occurred because there wasn't enough stitches and there's no stitch count to check my work for any of the following or previous rounds. This round also caused a lot of problems for the following rounds in the body where the single crochet stitches were off consistently at the end of the round. So there was definitely a stitch count error somewhere along the way and I'm not sure where it happened. A minor thing that I noticed was the word gat, I think is meant to be the word hat, but it's misspelled, but it was initially confusing because I was thinking to myself, what is a gat? And then finally, the last error in the pattern that I noticed was that the eyes have a color change, but it says to use white yarn instead of yellow. So that was probably like a copy and paste error instead of an honest error where they were showing you in the pattern photos that it should be white instead of yellow. So overall, this pattern had a lot of little issues that I think could have been fixed if there was an English speaking editor who was able to look at the pattern and double check that those things were working and making sense. But there were also some errors in the pattern that I don't think are accounted for by the translation. I think that honestly, there was just probably some things that the pattern designer left out just because they didn't want to write up the instructions super thoroughly. So that is why I will have to rate this pattern 3 out of 5. I'm honestly giving it a little bit of slack because of the English translation being something that most pattern designers don't offer. And I understand that if you're not a native English speaker, it might be a little bit more difficult to fully explain what you should be doing in some areas of this pattern. The next pattern I reviewed for this video, you guys already got a sneak peek of the final result, but it is Derpy or Tteoki the Tiger by Leilu's Crochet Shop. This was a really cool pattern to make, and I did do a little bit of implementing some changes so that I could use safety eyes instead of having to go to the store and buy felt and you know, cut out a bunch of felt pieces instead. So mine will definitely look a little bit different from the final product that you see in the photos, maybe a lot different, based on the fact that a lot of the things that are in the photo are felt pieces cut out, where in some areas I crocheted pieces, other areas I used safety eyes, safety nose, and then I've also used some embroidering techniques instead of felt to achieve the same result. The first note that I have about this pattern is I noticed some vague instructions, specifically that there was no stitch count at the end of each round. This was really sad because whenever you get an error in a pattern and you're trying to solve for what you did wrong in previous rows, you can't double check your work easily. You have to tally up the stitch count yourself and hope that it's actually correct and there's no errors. Another thing that I noticed was that there weren't any work in progress photos until you get to the face assembly section, and even in that section I feel like it was a little lacking in the different angles that we could have looked at some of the more complicated designs on the face and on the back. Then in the legs section, the pattern doesn't tell you to fasten off. You go straight from the last round of the legs into the instruction to stuff the rest of the leg and sew them on the body from round 8 up to round 11. That was a little bit confusing to me just because it's not obvious that you're supposed to stop working, fasten off, and have like a long yarn tail so that you can sew them onto the body. I also noticed that there's not a assembly section. Instead, all of the assembly instructions are given right after each piece is made, which is personally not what I prefer to see. I'd rather assemble everything at the same time or assemble it in a time that makes sense instead of having pieces of the tiger and not all of the pieces to compare where other things should be placed when I'm assembling it. The next note that I have is that there is an error in the pattern in round 17. There aren't enough stitches to make all of the written stitches work. It calls for you to make 3 single crochets, then a decrease 6 times, and there are 1 too many stitches to make that work. The next note that I have is that there's no alternative to felt instructions. This is a pretty minor note, and it's definitely up to you and what you prefer yourself and if you want to work with felt or not. I did go ahead and write some instructions for you guys if you want to make the blue and orange piece of this cat's face instead of having to cut out felt. So let me go ahead and read those instructions that I wrote for you guys if you want to do that yourself. So for the first eye, starting in orange, you'll chain 6. Then starting from the second chain in the hook, you'll increase. Then you'll make 3 single crochets, and then you will make a 3 increase into 1 stitch. So 3 single crochets into 1 stitch. And then on the opposite side of the chain, you will make 3 single crochets and then increase. In the next round, you'll slip stitch 2, and then you will single crochet, double crochet, single crochet, and then slip stitch 2. And you shouldn't have worked all of the stitches in the round. You'll fasten off early before you get to the start of the round. After that, you will attach your light blue color to the opposite corner from where we fastened off. And in the back loops only, you will slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, double crochet increase, half double crochet, single crochet, and then you will slip stitch 8, which should get you to the end of the row, but you might have to do an additional slip stitch to close the gap where we can see the color change happen. And then after that, you'll fasten off and leave a long tail for sewing that on. I also suggest that you use safety eyes and attach them to the orange part. You can put them wherever you want. I ended up putting them kind of dead center in the orange part. Then for eye number 2, you have to do everything kind of slightly different. Your orange instructions are the same, but for your light blue section, you do it in a different order so that it's symmetrical and you have the right side facing out on both sides of your tiger's face. So once you get to the light blue section and you've attached your yarn, you're gonna attach to the same spot. And then in the back loops only, you're gonna slip stitch 8, single crochet, half double crochet increase, half double crochet, single crochet, and then you'll slip stitch and fasten off with a long tail. And of course, you attach your safety eyes to the center of that orange part. The final thing I noticed about the pattern was that it could be lower sew. The front legs of the tiger are single crocheted closed and sewn in between 2 rounds, and it could have been really easy to just crochet the legs into that round. Just make the legs first, then when you're working on the body, add those legs in, and that would eliminate the need for some extra sewing that adds time. So overall, I thought this was a really cute pattern. I really enjoyed making it. Obviously, I noted some things that could be things that you prefer, such as like the felt versus crocheting those pieces yourself. Obviously, the crochet pieces are a work in progress. As you can see when I turn it to the side, those eyes look really puffy and they look like they're sticking out. And I know that if you're working with felt, you won't achieve the same effect. It'll look much more flat and probably a little bit better. But I didn't have any of those felt colors when I crocheted this and didn't think about picking up any at the store. So that's why I went ahead and made those instructions. And also, I ended up using a safety nose for the face detail instead of cutting out felt as well. And I just ended up waiting until the very end of the pattern before I stuffed the head to decide if I was gonna try to embroider that nose on or if I was just gonna pop a safety nose in there. And that is something you can implement yourself as well if you want to avoid doing some of those felt things. So anyway, I would give this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed is a pattern that was located on Ko-fi, and there was at one point when I started planning to make this video a YouTube tutorial for making these as well, but it's no longer up. Maybe it was privated, maybe it changed to unlisted, I'm not sure what happened, but it is the Jinu and Rumi little keychain heads here, and this is a pattern by Moon G Crochet. My initial thoughts about this pattern is that it's really cute. I love how they have like the different animal hoodies on, and I love how Rumi's braid sticks out of her hat, and it's really pretty, really easy to crochet that as well. For Jinu, we obviously have this cute little tiger hat. His looks a little bit more oblong than Rumi's does, but that is just because I had to add a lot more rows of this blue color for Jinu's head for some reason. I think I might have overstuffed it, or it was just like really cramming a lot more stuffing in there than I did with Rumi, and that's why the overall shape is different. But I did use like the same yarn for the face, so I'm not sure why the shape is so different. I did have to add a lot more rows to the blue part of this hoodie just because the yarn weight was significantly different. I didn't notice that until I had finished, and a lot of his face was still sticking out. There's probably still more of his face sticking out than should actually be as well. So I just wanted to note that. That's not part of my notes. That was honestly just like a user error when crocheting these, but it's supposed to look more like Rumi's than this one does. It's just, it ended up being a little bit more oblong and weird shaped than it's supposed to look. My first note was that I noticed vague instructions in this pattern, starting off with there's no instruction to stuff either of the heads. Then in the eyes section, I appreciated the work in progress step-by-step photos, but it's not obvious what we're mapping out or specifically where we're supposed to embroider, because there's not any photos of the black yarn being added or a before and after you have those pins in with the embroidery. And there's also no written instructions here, and it also doesn't number the photos so that you know which step comes before which step. So it's really unclear whether you should read the instructions row by row like you would read a book, or if you should read them one column at a time, and it was not really obvious what stitches we were embroidering here. Next, in Jinu's hair, when you create chains, then work back on them, it doesn't tell you which chain to start your work in, which was a little bit confusing, especially when we got to a different area in the pattern and it was kind of hard to see where we were supposed to crochet, if there was going to be enough chains to crochet into it. But we'll get into that later when I talk about a different note about the pattern. Then in Rumi's hair section, it tells you to repeat the same sequence until you have 5 split puff stitches, but it doesn't tell you where to start that sequence, like where the repeat starts. I think the repeat needs to be defined like this. We'd have a star, and then it would say puff stitch in the center of last split puff stitch, yarn over and pull through half the loops, chain 1, yarn over and pull through remaining loops, chain 1, slip stitch into center chain between puffs, and then you'd have another star to recognize that that is the end of the repeat. And I think that would be a little bit more clear about what you should be doing every time. Then in the ears section, this was just Jinu's pattern. I had no idea how you're supposed to fit all of the stitches in round 2 there. There's only 3 stitches in round 1. Then in round 2, you're supposed to work 6 stitches total into the previous round. And the only way to make this work would be to increase in each stitch from the previous round. Then in the assembly section, the instructions are just work in progress photos, just like the eyes were, and there are no written instructions alongside to help you figure out what specifically you're doing in each of those photos. There's also a diagram that I don't really understand, and it almost appears like the ears are crocheted into the head, but I'm not completely sure. There is a hook in the photo though, kind of held up next to one of the ears. Either way, it's really confusing to just have photos and no written instructions here. It also looks like for Jinu's instructions, there's a black outline added to the cat's eyes, but at no point in the instructions does it tell you to add that black line. Then circling back to what I was talking about earlier, I did notice an error in the pattern for Jinu's hair strands. I noticed that there was not enough chains to make all of the stitches in the instructions, specifically when it said chain 8, turn, 2 slip stitch, 2 single crochet, and 4 half double crochet. The only way to make that work was if you were to crochet into the chain that you would typically use as a turning chain when you chain and then work back into the chain. It's not clear what you're supposed to do there because other areas in that same part of the pattern, you chain a certain amount of stitches and all of the stitches fit if you work into the second chain from the hook as you would normally do. So overall, a lot of little errors I noticed in this pattern. I appreciated all of the work in progress photos, and I think this was the first time that I ever ran into a pattern that had a lot of work in progress photos, but not enough written instructions to explain what you're doing in those specific steps. And it was definitely a first for me to note that instead of saying, oh, there's not enough work in progress photos, I don't know what's going on. It was like the opposite way around. There was too many work in progress photos and not enough explanation about what was happening in those photos. So overall, I think this pattern is really cute. I think the Jinu would probably turn out a lot better if all of your yarn weights are the same throughout instead of working with different ones. So with that being said, I would rate this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed is a pattern by Beetle Makes, and it is the Kpop Magpie. This one is really cute. We have symmetrical eyes on both sides, so there's the 3 eyes on both sides of this magpie. We also have a difference in the pattern because this one actually has legs and it's meant to be sitting instead of standing. I was a little worried when I initially made the pattern because I couldn't remember in the final photo if the legs were made to stand up or if they're laying down, but I was really stressing for a bit. I was thinking to myself, this thing is not going to stand up on 2 legs. I don't know what they're expecting. But then I was pleasantly surprised when it's just sitting with its legs sticking out like this, and I think it's really cute like this, honestly. Another positive note about this pattern is that there are a lot of work in progress photos, and that made it really easy to follow. It was a really pleasant surprise because I feel like when a pattern like this is released, it's usually released pretty quickly, and there's not really a lot of people out there who have tested the pattern before it gets released. In fact, I don't think any of these patterns, maybe one of them, maybe 1 or 2 actually had testers for the patterns. But this was one of them, I think, that did not, but I will definitely correct that on screen if there were testers for this pattern. But I was pleasantly surprised with all of the detail that went into this pattern to make it a success. However, I did notice some vague instructions starting in round 16. I think it could be a little bit clearer about what stitches are going where, specifically when we start working into the back of the chain 7 from the previous round. It says to single crochet 5 up the back of the chain, but then it says to increase 11 single crochets, and it doesn't tell you or mention where that's to increase should fall. I assume that it should be at the top of the 2 stitches at the tip of that chain 7 piece, and then it would be single crochet to the end of the round from there, but it's not immediately obvious. And that same note goes for the following rounds where we're making an increase, and I think it should be in the general same area every time, but there's no note on the side of the page or anything like that that tells you like, hey, make sure this stitch is falling here. I also wish that the instructions told you how many stitches should be in between the eyes, not between vertically. It does that really well. It tells you which rounds it should be falling in between, but it doesn't tell you how many stitches should be in between the eyes horizontally, so that when you're assembling the final product, you have enough room here to put the beak in between the eyes. Then the last thing that I noticed as a vague instruction was that the assembly instructions were not very specific. It just said, sew this to this, and then we would get photos of each finished assembly step, but no specifics about where in relation on the body you should sew each piece on in relation to each other or anything like that. So it was a little bit vague. But overall, I enjoyed this pattern, and I think this is a really great one if you're looking for a magpie pattern, so I would rate this 4 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed is the Derpy Tiger by Ami Amour. This is a pattern that's available as written instructions on her website, and she also has video tutorials alongside it, or you can just watch the video tutorials on their own if you prefer that to make this little tiger. And overall, I think he looks really derpy, like a lot more derpy than hers probably does. Again, because I didn't use felt pieces, instead I chose to embroider some of these things on. Another thing that you'll notice is that the upper teeth and lower teeth aren't a part of this pattern. That's something that I improvised using a different pattern. So to make these upper teeth, I just used the instructions from Jinu's hat for the lower teeth to make those upper teeth. So as you can see, once you put them side by side, they look really, really similar. It's because they're the same instructions, and both of those are free. So you can use that if you want to. And then for the lower teeth, I didn't want another set of these big old chompers on here, so I ended up just slip stitching some white along the inside of the mouth here so that you can see a little bit of the gums peeking through underneath the row of white here. But mainly I just wanted to hide that transition and make it look a little bit more like teeth and not just like gums sticking out of the mouth. So the first thing that I noticed was that there were a lot of confusing instructions in here, a lot of instructions that contradicted the video instructions actually as well. Starting with the pink part of the mouth, specifically the photos weren't clear enough about what was being done after round 3 for me to make it correctly. I didn't realize that I made it incorrectly until I got to round 7 of the head and I was supposed to crochet the mouth into the head, and it was just not the right shape when I did that. What you're actually supposed to do is fold the mouthpiece in half with the wrong side facing you and the right sides facing each other. And then when she says sew the straight line of the fold closed by single crocheting 6 across, what she actually means is that you need to create 6 single crochets across the fold on the wrong side, and that way it will create a seam across the middle of the circle without closing it entirely. The mouth should be able to stay open like a clamshell. What I did the first time around was, you can't really see it here because the tongue is in the way, but it's basically a circle shape, 3 rounds of a circle. And then what I ended up doing was this circle, it says folded in half, so then we have half of a circle, we have the half moon shape. And what I ended up doing was I crocheted around the outside of it like this to close it. It wasn't immediately obvious to me that that wasn't the actual way you were supposed to do it, because in other patterns where you're using the same technique, you do that and you don't crochet across the part that you're not sewing closed. And then the other thing that was confusing was the word sew closed, because you're not actually sewing that part closed. You're sewing a seam down the middle of it, like the diameter of the circle, and you're not actually sewing or crocheting any of the other pieces of that circle to each other. You're just making a line down the center so that it kind of acts as a clamshell so that it can open and close, and it has a little bit of like a seam in it, like a book opening or closing. Next, in the front leg pair section, I think when we join the legs together, there needs to be a note that the 2 single crochets we made to attach the legs together don't count in the stitch count anymore, and that we won't work into those stitches anymore either. Otherwise, the stitch count doesn't make sense, because with the 2 middle single crochets we used to crochet the legs together, that would make 18 single crochet stitches in this round. I feel like this could also be improved if it told you to move the stitch marker to the new first stitch of the round instead of keeping it in the same spot or ignoring it. Then in the body section, attaching the legs, I had the same note as I did about the front pair legs, where we're adding stitches, but those don't count in the round, and we're not going to work in those stitches anymore. It's also really hard to tell which stitch you should start in when you crochet them together, especially when using the video as a reference, because it doesn't really zoom in on what you're doing there, and I had to replay that over and over again to get it right. The final thing that I noticed was an error or 2 in the pattern. Starting with round 8 of the head, the instructions are written wrong. I only know that because I watched the video as well, and I was confused in this area. It says in the written instructions to attach the mouth, the bottom portion, to the head by single crocheting in the next 12 stitches, and then single crochet in the next 12 stitches on the head. But in the video, you're crocheting into the next 12 unworked stitches from the mouth only, not the mouth and the head together. Then after that, you single crochet 12 into the head part only. So if I were to follow the written instructions of the pattern, I would be crocheting the mouth and the head together, and it would be like this one flat piece. Instead of what the pattern is trying to do is it's trying to create this curve here so that the upper part of the mouth is like left open. I feel like a note added here in the pattern would be really helpful, specifically a note that said that the mouth is crocheted into the head over 2 rounds, and then once we crochet the bottom part of the mouth into the head, we don't work into those stitches again. Instead, you ignore them and work on the other unworked stitches from the mouth next. Another error that I noticed was that in round 2 of the body, there was an error. It should be an increase in each stitch, but instead it says single crochet in each stitch around 12 stitches, and the previous round only has 6 stitches, so that is incorrect there. So overall, I found a lot of issues in this pattern, specifically where the pattern video instructions were not lining up with the written instructions. I don't know what that's about, if it's just not thoroughly written enough in the written instructions, but then at the same time there were errors in the written instructions that didn't line up with the video. So the video would be correct and it would have the correct instructions, but then in the written instructions those were wrong. So I'm not sure why that is. It's really easy to rewrite written instructions, especially if it's on your own website and it's not like a photo that you posted to Instagram like most of the patterns in this series are. You can very easily edit your own website's text to correct those issues, but it hasn't been corrected. So anyway, I would give this pattern 2 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I tested was a YouTube pattern, and it was a pattern that was not in English. It had instructions in a different language, but there were subtitles with the English instructions in them. So it's the HUNTRIX Pattern by Mercurio. I could be pronouncing that wrong. Crochet on YouTube, and her pattern has all 3 of the HUNTRIX ladies in like chibi form. So I want to show you the first draft of one that I made, and then I went back and remade it. So here is that one. This is how this one turned out, using the embroidery that the pattern features to create the eyes instead of using safety eyes. For the rest of them, I ended up using safety eyes, and I think they turned out a lot better. I also changed up the body color because the body color on this one is too close to the shirt and pants color, so you can't see the details on the clothing as nicely as you can on the rest of these. But this is Mira. This is the first one that I made. Another thing you might notice is that there is a little, there's some black yarn stuff here back here, but there are a little bit of gaps between the hair strands back here. That is just because of the way that I sewed it on, but I tried to do that a little bit better on the next one that you'll see. Another thing is you embroider these like gold details on the outfits of each of the girls, and I tried to do it as detailed as possible to match their photos while still looking pretty good. So here's the first draft of Mira. Then if you want an expectations versus reality right now, this is a really good example of how things can turn out better if you just like work a little bit harder on making them look a little bit better, and also you just put more time into making it look nice. So here is Mira V2, and I think she looks so much better. I embroidered some facial details on her. I also changed the color of blush that I used on the face so that it's not as dark, and I think she came out a lot better. Her hair looks a lot better in the back. It's not as kind of unkempt as this one, and there's not as much gapping between strands of hair. So I really like how this one came out a lot better than this one. So obviously this pattern also has Rumi and Zoe in it as well. So here is Zoe. She came out really cute. I love how I did like the eyelashes slightly different on all of them so that they have kind of like different looking facial expressions. and kind of give out their personalities a little bit more. So like Mira has a little bit more of a meaner expression because that's how she is in the show. She's just like a little bit more blunt and not as like bubbly as Zoe is. So Zoe's got like more wide open eyes and looks a little bit more like whimsical as well. And then finally we have Rumi, and Rumi came out really cute too. I think I stuffed her head maybe a little bit more than the other girls, and because of that her head looks a little bit bigger, but I think having like less hair to kind of like frame out her face also makes her face look a little bit bigger as well. But she came out really cute too, and she's got this really big beautiful braid, and yeah, I love all of these cute little HUNTRIX girls, and I really enjoyed this pattern a lot. So let's go ahead and get into some of the things that I noticed. So starting off, I wanted to mention the language barrier here. I noticed that in areas of the pattern where normally I would be referring to a stitch as a bobble stitch, it was referring to it as a popcorn stitch. It was initially kind of confusing to me because I was trying to figure out what PP was supposed to stand for in these subtitles, but at some point in the pattern, after watching her doing it and figuring out that it was kind of like a bobble, I had noticed her saying the word popcorn. So I guess that doesn't translate well in whatever language she was speaking. Another thing I wanted to note was that in the English subtitles, there were no notes about tension. It's very possible that in her voiceover she was probably speaking about the tension affecting where your arm bobbles would be so that they would line up with your leg bobbles, but in the English subtitles it didn't mention anything about that. Next up, I noticed some vague instructions in the English subtitles. Again, I can't speak on the actual narration and voiceover of the video because I can't understand that language, but sewing the ears onto the head just says to sew the ears and make the eyes in round 13. It doesn't say how many stitches should be between the ears or the eyes, and there's no additional English instructions for sewing the eyes on. In the video, it looks like you find the center of the face on round 13 and you mark it with a pin, and then you're supposed to count 2 stitches over on either side of it to make the eyes. The ears look like they're done after the eyes by counting 2 stitches away from the eyes and then sewing them on there. Another vague part of the video that I noticed was that I wish that there was a video process filmed of Zoe's hair being pinned on, because that is the only character we don't have that for. The rest of the girls, we have hair being pinned on in the video instructions and you can see exactly where she places it. But for Zoe's video, we don't have that. I also noticed that there is a possible error in the instructions, at least the English instructions, specifically for Zoe's hair. In round 8, it says round 9, but it's supposed to be round 8 because there's no round 8 before round 9 appears on screen. And in the non-English instructions, it says round 8 or V8, whatever it is, instead of V9. That's not the only error I noticed in Zoe's hair instructions, but I also noticed that in round 8 there seems to be an error where the repeat is hard to follow. This is the way it's written. It says round 8, 9 single crochets, and then in parentheses it says chain 7, 6 slip stitch, end parentheses, and then it says 2 slip stitch, and then in parentheses again, it says chain 2, 1 single crochet, end parentheses. And then it says skip 1 stitch and 1 slip stitch times 4. 1 slip stitch, and then in parentheses, it says chain 7, 6 slip stitch, and then in end parentheses, and it says 10 single crochet. I think this is a little confusing, and I think that there should be parentheses in a different area of the pattern to signify what we're repeating specifically. I think that the repeat times 4 starts when we chain 2, so I think it would be more obvious to notice that repeat if we were to put that whole step in brackets and have the times 4 come afterwards. So it would be bracket, chain 2, 1 single crochet, skip first stitch, and 1 slip stitch, and then end bracket and ×4. And that way it would be less confusing and it would be easier to understand what you're repeating there. The last thing that I noted was that there was no option to place safety eyes. So when I decided that I wanted to use safety eyes instead of embroidering, I kind of had to just figure out where I was placing them in the round and kind of guess where it should go in relation to where the embroidered eyes would have gone. So that being said, I think this pattern was really cute. I definitely don't want to judge it too harshly because I was just going off of what the English subtitles said. I don't know if it's easier to understand in the language that it's voiced in, but I can't speak to that because I can't understand that language. But overall, I really enjoyed this pattern. I love how much you can personalize each of the character, specifically with like the embroidering of the uniforms and how you can do basically whatever you want to make them really cute. There's not any like instructions or video tutorial on like what you can do differently on each of them, but she does show a little bit of the embroidering of what she does for Mira at least. I can't remember if she does the rest of them, but I think it's really cute and they're really unique. And then I think in the future she may come out with a pattern for the Saja boys as well, which would be really cool. Those are also characters from the movie if you're unfamiliar. But yeah, I think this pattern is really cute and I would rate it 4 stars out of 5. Again, going a little easy on it because I can't understand the language that the pattern is written in. So next up was a video tutorial on YouTube by Memo's Art House, and it was the Birdie pattern, and I really like how this one came out a lot. Obviously a little bit different from the other magpie birds that we've done in this video. This one also called for felt eyes as well, but I ended up not doing that just because I don't have any yellow felt. So I ended up using 25mm offset pupil safety eyes and embroidering some black over the top of the eyes so that it looks like he's giving you that lazy side eye there with the eyelid half closed, and I really like how it turned out. I like how this one has like a little bit more girth to it. It's a little bit more chunky than the other ones. The other ones have like skinnier necks, more canon to what the movie bird looks like, but this one just, he feels like a little bit more sturdy and structured, and I like the overall appearance of this one, I think, the best. And it probably took me the least amount of time as well because we're missing some of those details like the spots and the legs. I think some of the shapes are also a little bit simpler to create just because they're not as customized to fit this bird exactly what it looks like in the movie. My only note about this pattern is just that the finished design doesn't really want to sit up on its own on a flat surface. It kind of falls over, partially because it's a little top heavy. So let me set it on the background and show you guys what I mean. All right, so I'm going to set it here. And he instantly wants to lean forward because he's top heavy, I think is the problem. So I wasn't, obviously some of these other patterns have the same deal happening. Like this one topples over too, very top heavy. It's just because of the way he's constructed, he doesn't want to stay upright. The one with the legs obviously sits the nicest just because there are legs to stabilize it. There's like a kickstand essentially with those legs being there. So maybe adding some legs to this one would stabilize it some more, but obviously you can always just balance it in an area if you're just like leaving it on a bookshelf or something like that. It just could be a potential issue for some people if they prefer their plushies to just want to be balanced and staying upright without any real issue. So anyway, I would give this pattern 4.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is another Instagram pattern, and it's actually an accessory for a different tiger pattern that I have not had access to because it's a purchasable pattern. It's not a free pattern. By the same creator. The creator is Stitch and Glitch Crafts, and it's the flower pot for Derpy. This is a really cute pattern. It was really simple to make and follow. And the only thing that I notice about it is just that it wants to like kind of topple over. It doesn't want to sit upright, but that's fine because in the movie it just keeps toppling over, and that's kind of the gag about it, is that it just doesn't want to sit upright. The only thing I noticed about this pattern was that there were some vague instructions. Specifically, it doesn't tell you what color you're supposed to start in, and the pattern also doesn't tell you to fasten off the brown color and weave in the ends when you're finished with that color. So overall, it's a really simple pattern, easy to follow. There are some minor notes with it, so I would give it 4 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed is another pattern by that same creator, Stitch in Glitch Crafts, and it is Derpy's hat. So if you're not familiar with the movie, the magpie bird that we see so many of in my background now that are that so many people are making patterns for, it is wearing a hat in the movie. But the funny thing about the hat is that it wasn't made for the bird. The owner of the tiger, who is Jinu, this character here, he made the hat for the tiger to wear, but the funny thing is that the bird steals the hat all the time. So this is a hat specifically for the tiger, and it actually fits on him really cute and well, as you can see. And the only thing that I noticed about this pattern was just that there were no work in progress photos, and there's also no instruction to fasten off and weave in your ends after the pattern is finished. So those are the only thing I noticed. Both of the flower pot and the hat are very minor patterns, like little accessories that you can add on to anything really. It doesn't even have to be this pattern specifically or a similar pattern. Obviously it's not meant for that one, but a similar pattern. So all that being said, it's a really good pattern to use, especially if you're looking for a little hat accessory to add on to plushies that are that size, and I would give the pattern 4 stars out of 5. The final pattern I reviewed for this video is a YouTube pattern that was made by May, and it is Mabokie, the magpie. But this is as far as I got before I did not finish the pattern. I DNF'd the pattern. Was not a fan of this pattern, to say the least. I got really frustrated really quickly, not only because the pattern is shot in vertical format in a horizontal format channel. Like if you're on YouTube, you should be shooting your videos horizontally, especially if they're not short form content. Like short form content, they want all of those videos to be vertical videos because they're meant to be watched on a phone. But I don't know a lot of people who are probably watching crochet video tutorials in a video format vertically. I think most of those people are probably watching them full size on bigger screens so that you can see everything that is going on. At least me personally, that's how I operate when following video tutorials. But not only that was part of the issue, but also there were just a lot of little things about this pattern that added up to a huge frustration on my end and ended up with me not finishing the pattern. So let's go ahead and look at some of those issues now. So obviously I didn't finish the pattern. We're still wide open at the bottom here. Eyes aren't embroidered over. There's no beak, hat, anything like that. There's also some additional details in this pattern that I never got to because I didn't finish it. And because of that, the notes that I'm going to give you are not like the full expansive notes about this pattern, but the fact that I didn't finish making it should tell you how frustrating this pattern was, hopefully. So my first note was that there are vague instructions. This pattern has really vague instructions in some areas, and it's not consistent on how it applies techniques in different areas. Starting with hiding color transitions, sometimes you're supposed to double crochet into the previous round, and it doesn't tell you to like skip the stitch that stitch should have been into. It doesn't always tell you to do that. It also sometimes uses a double crochet increase into the previous round, and it's all just really confusing about when you're supposed to do certain things, if it's implied that you're supposed to skip stitches in certain areas when you do that, or what. It's just not really clear how that works. This pattern was really frustrating to follow. At some point, the creator just dropped the round count, so you don't even know where the round begins or ends, and you're just supposed to follow it word for word and just hope that you know where you're at in the pattern. You can't really track where you're at. So if you were ever to like mess up in the pattern and have to frog some of your work and start over, you'd have to find specifically in the pattern where that was, and there's not like round markers to figure out where you left off. The instructions for a lot of the rounds are also split into separate text graphics, which is frustrating because of the same reason. If you had to frog your work and then figure out where you left off, you can't just quickly catch up by looking at the text graphic and seeing everything that you're supposed to do in that round. You're supposed to rewind and fast forward back and forth until you find the area where you messed up and then start again, and then you have to hit play and then continue watching the instructions for the next part of the instructions. It's all just very frustrating. Then the point where I just gave up on the pattern and was just kind of done and really frustrating was that about here, so we have this yarn tail here, and this yarn tail is in the row previous to this yarn tail. So in this round, before I fastened off, it tells you to fasten off and attach your white yarn later in the pattern. And then you never rework around this area here. I don't know what that was about. I don't know why. It was so confusing and so frustrating trying to follow this pattern that once I finished this round where I fastened off and reattached and got all the way to here, I was just like, this is a lost cause. It's really hard to follow this pattern. It was really frustrating to figure out what was going on and how it was supposed to be made. Especially, I was just having a hard time trying to figure out why we were doing certain things. So in the front of this bird, it's kind of hard to tell because it's black yarn, but we started working in the back loops only every time we got to that spot. And I was like, why are we doing that? Why are we creating this ridge here? Maybe it was to like curve the work inward eventually, but I was just really lost about why we were doing it. If we were gonna come back to that area at some point and reattach our yarn or something, but it was concerning, it was frustrating, and I didn't see myself enjoying this pattern enough to finish it. So I'm sorry overall that I didn't finish it. Maybe it has some redeeming qualities at the end. I don't know, but I was kind of fed up of making Magpie after Magpie, and I think we have plenty of good ones to choose from now. I did 4 in this pattern. Obviously, I didn't finish the 4th one, but 3 of these are really good options for the Sussie Bird Magpie pattern, and I think any of those would be a better option than this one, unfortunately. I'm really sorry to the pattern designer. I'm sorry if it sounds really harsh. It's just, this was really, really frustrating and hard for me to follow. The way that it was edited was really hard. Some areas of the video, there was voiceover overlapping with like TikTok videos that had like music and voiceover on its own, and it was hard to hear what the person was saying in the instructions or getting the materials ready or just talking about the pattern in general. Other areas of the pattern, before I fastened off and said I'm done, there were also just videos popping up for some reason that the creator thought were relevant to the video because they were about K-pop Demon Hunters the movie, and I just didn't think it was like a great place to put those. It was kind of distracting. I know that some people may finish the pattern, they may like the pattern. It was just personally really hard for me to follow, and having the video so small and in vertical format as well was just really frustrating. So it just added to a pile of small frustrations that became big frustrations, and unfortunately I was not able to finish the pattern. So I don't think it's fair for me to rate the pattern, but if I were to rate the pattern because I didn't finish it and I just like couldn't get through it because of how frustrated I was, I would give it a 0 out of 5. But I don't think it's super fair for me to judge the pattern since I didn't finish it. So take that with a grain of salt. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Obviously, it's not as like filled out as you normally see when I have this shelf behind me of all the different plushies we did in this video, but we did do 10 patterns as we normally do. I just didn't have time to make all of the different sizes of each pattern because on average, I think almost all of these patterns, except for the 2 accessories that I made, were over an hour long each to make. So it was a lot of work to put this video together today. And I also wanted to get it out kind of quickly before the whole K-pop Demon Hunters trend died down and people aren't excited about it because people might not want to make these patterns again after it's not as popular anymore. So hopefully you found a pattern in this video that you want to try out yourself. Hopefully I offered enough of the Magpie patterns that you can find one that you really like and you really enjoy. I think if I were to pick one out of the 4 that I made, I would be in between the one that has legs, this one down here, or the one over here that has no legs and kind of has a hard time balancing. I think the one on top, I like the overall shape of that one a little bit more, but the one down here is just a little bit more stable and cute overall, just because there's not much you have to do to make it look nice when it's sitting on a shelf. So anyway, I hope you guys liked today's video. If you did, hit that like button, comment down below if you have any suggestions of like themes or anything like that you want to see in future videos. If you also want to suggest any pattern to me in general from Instagram or whatever, you can either comment below this video links to the patterns, or if it's on Instagram, you can just DM me directly those patterns. That's the easiest way for me to save them if you come across any patterns you want me to give my opinion about. So with that being said, I will see you guys next week, and bye!